Documentary filmmakers working on tight budgets and tight timelines cannot afford to make the mistake of getting back to your editing software and not having what you need to tell the story. This is a problem that limited me and my ability to get my documentaries made, screened, and published. But when I fixed it, I was able to screen my films with outlets such as National Geographic, The Atlantic, Business Insider, and brands such as The North Face. And there are 4 steps to solving this problem. The first area of risk when it comes to this problem is what I call the story concept risk. The story concept risk is an instance where you think you've identified this really interesting story that needs to be a documentary film. But then you get out into the field, you start gathering footage, maybe you conduct an interview or two, and then you get back to your editing software, you put the whole thing together, or you start to, and then you realize, wait, I do not have what I need to turn this into a compelling film. The story isn't right. All right, now there are 3 main reasons that you are likely to run into this story concept risk. The first is that you don't actually have a story to document. You just have a topic that interests you, or a place that interests you, or a person that interests you. And so you show up and you point your camera at those things for hours on end. This strategy might help you cut together a cool Instagram reel, but it's not going to set you up for making a compelling documentary film. Stories have a few key characteristics that you need to remember. They have characters who have desires and a sequence of events that illustrate the ups and downs of reaching that desire. Put another way, a story is about an individual who deeply desires something and who has to get off their ass in order to reach it. They have to strive, they have to work, and the story is not about whether they eventually get what they desire. The story is about the ups and downs of pursuing that goal and how that's changed who that character is on a deeper internal level. It's about their new set of beliefs, their new definition of self, and how that results in a new set of behaviors that becomes the character's norm. Let's ground this in a relevant example. A short documentary out there right now that I think will get nominated for an Oscar is called Instruments of a Beating Heart. It's 23 minutes, go check it out. On the surface, the topic of this story is about how elementary school students are taught in Japan and what values that teaching instills in them. That may have been the starting point for the director, a topic that piqued their interest, but then she turned that amorphous topic into a story by choosing a character who has a desire and who goes through the ups and downs of life to reach that desire, and emerges a changed person on the other side. In this example, the character is a first grader named Ayame. Her desire is to play in the school's band performance to welcome incoming first graders, and the journey she goes on is one where she faces the ups and downs of auditions and rehearsals on her way to the final performance. This story is so simple, so grounded. It doesn't take place on Everest or have celebrities or life and death scenarios. It's a first grader trying to play in the school band performance, but it's a story and it's beautiful. So if you have a concept or a topic you want to explore, your first step needs to be finding the character and desire that is most likely to illustrate it. The second reason you might run into the story concept risk is that you are choosing stories that aren't inherently visual. You might have interesting characters, desires, and journeys, but filmmaking is a visual form. So you need to make sure that you are choosing stories that are visually interesting. Like right now, I'm reporting a story for Business Insider's documentary team about bird flu. Bird flu, yes, it's a topic. So my first step is trying to find characters who are out there pursuing a goal that intersects with the news peg of bird flu. But simultaneously, I also have to think about visuals. There might be an amazing character working to develop a vaccine in a state-of-the-art laboratory. That sounds cool. But what if that person is just staring at a computer all day? That's not very visual. What if this person works in a biosecure lab that I can't even get access to unless I'm standing outside of some plexiglass window trying to film through? That's also not very visual. So my process isn't just about finding stories. It's about finding visual stories. Let print articles and podcasts tell the story of the lab worker. All right, this lesson was brought home to me in a powerful way when I worked on staff at Business Insider. Every single story idea I brought to them, the team would ask me, what are the visuals? They'd even go as far as to ask, what could be the very opening visual? And from there, I would create visually compelling hooks that looked something like this. These people are setting new blazes on purpose during California's worst wildfire season. It's called a prescribed burn, a method of bringing good fire back to the land.
You know, your head's always on a swivel, and you always want to be kind of on that fire's edge right there. That's going to be your safest place to be. Give it a whirl.
Now, I'm not saying that documentaries need to have visual hooks or some splashy, eye-popping candy. That's insider style. But what I am saying is that when you're developing your documentary, make sure you consider how visual it is. Is this story best told through film, or is it better told through audio or the written word? And the third reason you may face the story concept risk is if the documentary film you're creating focuses too much on parts of the past. Now, I'll caveat this by saying if you're working on a historical documentary or have a bunch of access to archival videos and photos, that's a different case. But a lot of early career documentarians that I chat with, they craft their story around a dramatic moment from a character's past. The problem is they have no visuals to tell that part of the story. The other problem is it doesn't leverage what they do have unique access to, which is whatever is going on in the character's life right now. So unless you have a specific visual plan for how you are going to illustrate the past, just don't make it the focal point of your film. All right, moving on, let's get to our second risk. The second big risk that will lead you to get into your editing software and realize you don't have what you need to make a good documentary. That risk is the key character risk. I'm kind of obsessed with character casting in documentaries because if you make the wrong decision when it comes to your choice of character, you will be stuck in the edit. You want someone who is the same on camera as they are off of it. You want someone with screen presence. You want someone who is actively seeking something they don't yet have. Someone who's passionate, who's likable, who's relatable, who has layers to their personality, who has strong convictions, and who takes action. If you have the opposite of those traits, you're in trouble. Now, another reason why you may run into the key character risk is if you rely on one interview with a key character to carry your film, because guess what? They might not deliver. They might not bring the goods, which again goes back to casting someone who will bring the goods. More often than not, though, what I see is interviews go off the rails in a way that means that the filmmaker doesn't have what they need in the edit because the filmmaker themselves didn't bring the goods. They didn't deliver. So here are 3 common ways I see filmmakers screw up their interviews with this key character. The first is that the filmmaker didn't have a sense of their story arc going into the interview. Now, this is so important because if you think about a story where there's a beginning, middle, and end, in Act 1, and Act 2, and Act 3, there's usually a couple different pivot points within that interview that you're going to talk about for your story. When I show up to an interview, I like to know what those pivot points are and make sure that I spend time talking about those different key moments in their lives. It's okay if we wander away from those pivot moments, but I need to know that I have in the bag those kind of pivotal moments in the story arc. So you need to plan that. If you don't, if you're just wandering and going all over in your interview, you're gonna get back and realize, oh man, I don't know what I have so much, but I don't actually have what I need. All right, the second way I see filmmakers not have what they need in the interview is they don't have transition moments in the interview. So this is in a circumstance where you as the interviewer, your voice is not in the film, okay? And you're also not having a narration in the film or text on screen. You're just relying on the people you're interviewing or your documentary subjects to carry your story. In this case, it's very helpful to have transition moments on camera and on audio. So what I'll often say sometimes is I will kind of feed the documentary subject a little transition line as long as it's the truth. I might tell them, hey, so I need a transition from like this moment in your life to this next moment in your life. So can you say something? From there, I ended up doing this. And then we have that little transition moment because my voice is not going to be in there. And it can be unnatural for someone telling a story in an interview to have like these nice clean transitions. So I'll maybe offer them a line that will help me transition because I'm always thinking about the edit in my head. And then before they say it, I'll say, only say that if it feels true. Now, another way I'll do this, or another reason why I might give some feedback to the interview subject when I'm doing an interview is so I don't hit the third, way that interviews go off the rails, which is that I don't have concise quotes especially for those sections of the documentary where I don't have a lot of footage to illustrate what they're talking about. So if I'm telling the story of a company who's at a breakthrough in their technology right now, but there was a 10-year history of that company leading up to this current moment, I'm not gonna wanna go for an hour in the interview maybe about the history of this company if I don't have many visuals for it. I'm gonna wanna get to the historic moment right now that I do have visuals for as soon as possible. So if they spend an hour just going through the history of their company, what I might say at the end of that hour is, hey, can we try that again? Let's just go through the history of your company, but can you tell it in like 1 to 3 sentences, just as concise as you possibly can, so I have a backup. And in that way, you have concise sound bites for sections of your film where you lack the visuals to really tell that story in depth. The third risk that you face when making a doc is the single scene risk. Now, this is when the success of your story relies almost entirely on one specific scene you want to document. And why is that a risk? Because what if you miss it? Now, I'm not saying that you should avoid these types of stories, but you should know that they are a gamble, and you should also understand ways to mitigate the risk. In fact, I myself am currently working on a personal documentary project that fits this exact scenario. For the past 18 months, I have been working on and off on a documentary film about end-of-life care for animals living on farmed animal sanctuaries. The idea of the story is to follow one elderly animal through the end of their life and illustrate how caretakers navigate the challenging ethical and emotional decisions that inevitably come up when you are making decisions about the life and death of an individual who can't speak our language to tell us what they want. As you might be able to tell, this story runs up against the single scene risk. The film does hinge on me being there to film when an animal is dying and when that animal is euthanized. But I have no control over when that will be. I have been filming this sheep named June for the past 18 months. Now, what if I'm traveling later this month and I get a text from the sanctuary that says that June died in her sleep? Honestly, me not being there at the end of her life is not only possible, it's likely. And yet I'm still trying. I am gambling in the face of the single scene risk. But I am taking steps to mitigate it. One way that I have mitigated the risk is to follow multiple aging animals in the hopes that when their time comes, I will be around to film, at least one of them. When I started filming with June, the sheep, I was also following this beautiful goat, Gertie. I filmed her for months, and then similar to the scenario I mentioned earlier, I was out in the field working one day and I got a text from the sanctuary that said Gertie had to be euthanized earlier that morning. The more animals I follow, the more chances I have with the gamble of this story premise. And it's something to think about for your projects if you also run the single scene risk. To paint the scene of how some of the top documentary filmmakers in the game navigate the single scene risk, I'd encourage you to check out the Sundance Grand Prize winning documentary, Boys State. It's from a few years ago. This is a feature-length film that was shot over the course of 1 week at a political summer camp in Texas where boys form their own mock governments. The highest government position in the camp is governor, and the film tells the story of two political sides of the camp and the characters seeking power and the governorship. It's amazing, but they ran so many risks. Out of the hundreds of kids at the camp, their success of the film in large part did depend on being able to tell the story of someone running for governor. Thankfully, that's what they were able to do, in large part because they started with a big team of filmmakers who fanned out across the camp and filmed a bunch of kids who said that they were going to run for governor. And then over time, they narrowed in on the ones who were proving to be more likely to succeed. But even at that level, this is a risky game, as the directors Jesse Moss and Amanda McBain shared with me on my podcast.
I mean, it's like craps, documentary filmmaking. I'm really not much of a gambler, but you really got to push all your chips in.
This was high risk, high reward.
There's like a series of moves you have to make or a series of roles you're making. And every time what's at stake gets bigger and bigger, because not gratuitously because you're trying to hit the big score. It's because I think if you're working at a place of high risk, the rewards are infinitely greater. I mean, as they would be financially in a casino. And for us, the rewards are like the depth of the film and the storytelling and the surprise. All of those things come because you take those risks. everywhere down the line, from the idea to the casting, financing, crewing, and then just see what happens.
All right, and the final risk that might leave you with not enough to work with in the edit is the lack of coverage risk. The lack of coverage risk is exactly what it sounds like: getting into the edit room and realizing you don't have enough footage to work with. There are 3 major reasons why filmmakers face this risk. The first is just not shooting enough. Maybe not shooting enough B-roll, especially when you're getting started as a documentarian. I want you to err on the side of overshooting and overshooting B-roll. Gather a lot, because over time you'll start to understand what you need and what you don't. B-roll is super valuable. Having too much is not nearly as big of a problem as having too little, because it's the footage that allows you to cut away from those talking head interviews. It fills the gaps and covers inevitable moments when your main footage doesn't quite flow. 2 is failing to capture natural sound and environmental audio. This is a sneaky one that often goes unnoticed until it's too late, but you might have great visuals, but if you're lacking ambient sound, the film will feel disconnected. When you're in the field, make sure you're recording natural sounds, whether it's the wind in the trees, the distant hum of a city, the buzz of conversation in a crowded space, or for me in my film, like the sound of just that sanctuary where the animals are. These audio details will not only give you more flexibility in the edit, but they will also make your films feel so much more immersive. All right, and the third one is not planning for coverage of reactions and details. Sometimes we get so focused on the big, exciting moments that we forget about capturing the small, intimate ones. Those moments like a character's subtle reaction, the close-up of a hand gesture, or just like a lingering shot in silence of a meaningful object or a person looking and just like reflecting. Without these, you're left with a string of actions that lack a texture and emotion. So make sure to film the in-between moments and the small details. These seemingly minor shots are often what brings your documentary to life in the edit. If you avoid or mitigate these 4 risks, you'll arrive back to your editing software in good shape with the footage, sound, and moments to create the best story you can. I'll see you next week on the channel. Remember, if you have questions from me that you want featured in my next Q&A video, there was a spot to submit a video down in the description. Super easy, selfie cam style. I hope to hear from some of you. Until then, go out and tell some stories.